And through the drifts the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between.
Hi guys, a little bit different format in this top 10. No Matt Gatherer this time, just me and my webcam. This week's top 10 is top 10 tips for playing sealed. A lot of players are kitchen table magic players. They don't play in tournaments a lot, and they don't have much experience with playing tournaments. And playing in your first DCI tournament, as in like bigger than F&M Magic, with real like level 2 judges, is a little daunting. A lot of players, they just play like the tutorial told them to. You know, you shuffle your deck, you draw 7 cards, you play a land. But playing a sealed tournament's so much more than that, because it gets serious. So here, without further ado, here's my top 10 tips for playing sealed. At number 10, don't listen to anybody. Nope. Most advice you get for playing sealed is bad. And that's the video. Have fun, everybody. See you next week. No, seriously. That's not the end. My rule 10 still stands. You don't listen to people. My advice for you is supposed to be liberating. Like, expand your mind. Think of what you can do. It isn't supposed to be a restrictive rule, because the more I played sealed, the more I realized that basically everyone was dumber than me. I had more experience than everyone else. People tried to give good advice, and it just didn't work. For example, one person just told me for sealed, just play 3 mana 2/2s and 4 mana 3/3s. Well, it just doesn't work, because if you play 3 mana 2/2s and 4 mana 3/3s, you're just going to lose to a 3/1 regenerating creature. Or a flyer, which is just going to fly over and you're just going to die. So following any basic rules for sealed just won't work. The point of sealed and of a brand new set is it's supposed to equally confuse experienced players and inexperienced players so they can play together. Because if you play constructed format, and this is say your first or second year of Magic the Gathering, you're going to get smashed. Some people like me have been playing for 24 years and can name off like 6,000 cards in their head, and you just don't have a chance. But in sealed, the experienced players don't have that knowledge, so they can't partake knowledge to young people. So if someone just says, put an extra land in your deck because you're playing control, you don't have to. In fact, one of Magic the Gathering's Duel of the Planeswalkers computer games specifically tells you how many creatures you should put in your deck. Do you know how many creatures you should put in your deck? As many good creatures you have. What should I put in my deck? Good cards. Play with good cards. What do you mean? Good cards. Yeah. Your sideboard is theoretically infinite. What that means is you are restricted by the packs you're given. But you can grab as many basic lands as you want. In fact, the judge's table is supposed to have a just giant stack of basic lands for you to put in your deck. And it means you can change the primary or secondary color of your draft deck after game 1 or game 2 of your best 2 out of 3 match. There is a rule against stalling, so you can't just like spend 5 or 10 minutes changing up your deck. But in my case, I was playing Mirrodin Draft, and I was playing Artifacts in red, and I just wanted to splash blue, so I'm like, well, let's just splash blue. So just get up, the player called the judge on me, for goodness sakes. He's like, you can't sideboard more than 15 cards. Yes, you can. Go to the judge's table, grab some basic lands. Did it for splashing blue once. Did it for I think Kamigawa. I just actually changed my entire secondary color. Just because I thought it just wouldn't work against your opponent's aggro deck, I would just change my deck into aggro control cards. And yeah, it ended up going like 5-1. So it works. Number 7. You can play 5 copies of a card. Sealed's not the same thing as constructed. In constructed formats, you need to play 4 copies of the card or less. In sealed, there's no limit. And how can you do that? Well, in booster draft, sealed boosters, you get 6 boosters typically, and 5 or all 6 of those boosters could have the same common. theoretically the same, uncommon or rare, but it's really highly unlikely. I had one friend play in Big Bear Arena at Nemesis release tournament. He had 5 copies of Cloudscape, and he did about 3-2 if I recall correctly. So it's not a bad idea to consider putting 5 cards of the same name in your deck if it's a good card. Number 6. Mulligans. You need to know how to mulligan. You can't depend on Magic the Gathering Online to mulligan for you anymore. And you might be facing a player which is his 5th game ever, which actually happened to me. Actually doesn't know how to start the game. So each player needs to know how to start the game. And there's been some rules changes. At first, there was a Richard Garfield mulligan, where you would have a 7-card hand, and if it had 0 or 7 lands, you would show the hand to your opponent to just show him that you had 0 or 7 lands. And then you would mulligan it, and you draw 7 cards, and then you had to keep those 7 cards no matter what. If you had a 0-land hand the first time and a 0-land hand the second time, you just didn't play a game of Magic. And that got thrown away for a Paris mulligan. In the Paris mulligan, the rule was the player who starts first takes the mulligan, and then that player can take a second mulligan. The player who chooses to not to play first, to draw first, actually has to wait for the player to play first to finish taking all of his mulligans, and then the player who chooses to draw first takes all of his mulligans. That's no longer the case. There's now the Vancouver mulligan, or I like to call it the Canadian mulligan. The Vancouver mulligan is you have 7 cards. The player who plays first decides to take a mulligan. At that point in time, the player who chooses to draw first has to say yes or no. And if you say no, you can't change your mind later. Say the active player takes a mulligan, you say, I don't want to take a mulligan. Well, if the active player, the player who plays first, takes a double mulligan, you can't take a single mulligan if you chose to draw first. You can't take a single, you can't take a double, because you already refused the first time. You can't change your mind if your opponent double mulligans. It's a little bit of a rules change, but you have to watch out that some players just don't realize the rules change, or exactly just the details of how to mulligan is just not apparent. Number 6. Mulligans. You need to know how to mulligan. You can't depend on Magic the Gathering Online to mulligan for you anymore. And you might be facing a player which is his 5th game ever, which actually happened to me. Actually doesn't know how to start the game. So each player needs to know how to start the game. And there's been some rules changes. At first, there was a Richard Garfield mulligan, where you would have a 7-card hand, and if it had 0 or 7 lands, you would show the hand to your opponent to just show him that you had 0 or 7 lands. And then you would mulligan it, and you draw 7 cards, and then you had to keep those 7 cards no matter what. If you had a 0-land hand the first time and a 0-land hand the second time, you just didn't play a game of Magic. And that got thrown away for a Paris mulligan. In the Paris mulligan, the rule was the player who starts first takes the mulligan, and then that player can take a second mulligan. The player who chooses to not to play first, to draw first, actually has to wait for the player to play first to finish taking all of his mulligans, and then the player who chooses to draw first takes all of his mulligans. That's no longer the case. There's now the Vancouver mulligan, or I like to call it the Canadian mulligan. The Vancouver mulligan is you have 7 cards. The player who plays first decides to take a mulligan. At that point in time, the player who chooses to draw first has to say yes or no. And if you say no, you can't change your mind later. Say the active player takes a mulligan, you say, I don't want to take a mulligan. Well, if the active player, the player who plays first, takes a double mulligan, you can't take a single mulligan if you chose to draw first. You can't take a single, you can't take a double, because you already refused the first time. You can't change your mind if your opponent double mulligans. It's a little bit of a rules change, but you have to watch out that some players just don't realize the rules change, or exactly just the details of how to mulligan is just not apparent. Number 4. You can bail. Paper Draft allows for round 0 drops, and I'll tell you why. One time when I was drafting Kamigawa, I pulled a foil Kakusho. Isn't that great? Well, not really, because in paper draft, you don't get the deck you're playing. You get the deck that a random person on your table is going to play. Why? Because people will pull out their own deck, their own tournament packs that they brought with them, and not use the tournament pack they cracked open at the store, and it'll be a pre-opened pack, and they'll put the best cards in, and they'll just cheat their butts off. So the DCI has made people open up other people's tournament packs and booster sealed, write down every single card that's there. There's a checklist for normal cards. There's a checklist for foil cards. You check every single normal card and foil card. And this process takes several minutes. And then you close up your cards. You fold the checklist in your tournament pack. And then your judge will tell you a random number of people to pass it to the left or the right or maybe across to, which randomizes who gets the sealed pack pretty significantly. You don't. So if you just say, okay, I'll just sit next to my friend, and then the judge will say pass to your left. The judge won't say pass to the left. He'll say pass to the left, pass to your left, pass across from you, blah, 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 blah. And your friend sitting next to you probably won't get the same deck. There's no way to collude with cheating. It's actually a great way to prevent cheating. But hey, if you just open a fucking Kusho, and that's worth more than the entire tournament's prize, because it's the best card in Kamigawa, you can stand up and you can forfeit the tournament. And the judge told me you actually lose points if you do something like that. But it's something you're allowed to do. Especially another time I was drafting, and I was on a waiting list for an unhinged tournament. And I'm like, oh man, I was like 10th on the waiting list. The DCI judge says there's very little chance we'll get down to like the 10th person. We only have so many booster packs. The tournament is capped at this many people. And there's no way people won't show up. We'll start counting at like the first person on the wait list and keep going down, but there's no way. Well, guess what? I was 10th on the waiting list and got in. Ho ho, I should make a video on that sometime. Number 3, watch for cheaters. There are players who put cards on their lap or put cards in their shirt pocket. And if you're not looking, if you just, reach into your pocket and grab a handkerchief and start sneezing, they will use that time to reach into their shirt pocket and pull out a card. My brother was playing in Booster Draft, and my mom was watching him play this guy the entire time. And my mom raised her hand and called the judge. She said, "Judge, I just saw that guy pull a card out of his shirt pocket while my brother wasn't looking." And the judge is like, I didn't see it. It's that terrible. It's basically no one will help you unless you catch the cheater yourself. You actually have to stare at your opponent's cards. You have to stare at your opponent's hand. You have to stare at the opponent's board. You can't actually be looking around. Because the thing about Magic the Gathering is when you play a long tournament, like 40 people plus, you paid for the hotel room, you paid for breakfast. So a lot of people just have a lot of money put into this tournament right before they start, and they really expect to win, and some people just try anything. So my best advice to you is just be aware. Number 2, do not cheat. This is harder than it sounds. In paper draft, a lot of times between rounds, you just excuse yourself to the bathroom. These things last for hours. Usually at the end, you're hungry. Around round 6 because it's been like 5 hours since you last ate or more. And during that time, there's like this urge, like I should tune my deck, because in kitchen table Magic, you play against your dad or your mom or whatever, and after the round, you're like, oh, I got one more idea. I want to put one more card in this deck, or one of these cards in this deck is bad. You cannot do that in sealed. You cannot tune your deck in the middle of the tournament. It's really easy to get away with it. There's not enough judges in Magic to stop everyone who does this. Would you pay more money for a limited tournament if they could get more judges? If they could just do more random deck checks to prevent people from tuning 1 or 2 cards in their limited deck? That's something that Travis Wu went over a lot. There's a couple of videos on the series if you want to look at it. he's talked about people just putting glory bringers on their lap. There's just a lot of cheating in Magic the Gathering. Just make sure you try your best to stay honest. I myself have taken a game loss by failure to board. Like, game 2, there was like 2 Masticores in my hand, and I have 1 Masticore and main board, 1 Masticore sideboard, and I'm like, oh no. My scroll deck's got two Masticores in my main board. That's not supposed to happen. Yeah. Be honest. Number 1, have fun. What? Wall of Ice Cream found a way to make money? That's right. You can help your favorite YouTuber, your third favorite YouTuber, by getting a month of Humble Bundle and referencing me with this reference code, or going to Hulu and buying 0 months of Hulu, or going to G2A and checking out that website. I have a reference link right there on the screen. So just go, and I can get a couple of bucks, and it pays for these cool things I have, like a Yeti microphone that I can't really afford. So go for it. Help your third favorite streamer.